Hey guys, so today we are answering a subscriber question, and the question in question was, Frederick, how do I deal with product managers and artificial deadlines? So let's get into it. Well, almost all deadlines are artificials, apart from maybe death, I suppose. But for the most part, artificial deadlines are a factor in IT. And dealing with them is very simple. You either meet them or you don't. That's how it kind of goes. But if we're going to take this a little bit more seriously and talk about probably what this person actually means, and that is basically how to effectively deal with this sort of thing, I will say that from my perspective, there are three things that you need to get right in order to do this effectively. And it's basically going to come down to one part personal security, one part empathy or understanding people, and one part business mindset. You see, first and foremost, what we need to understand here is that it doesn't matter if it's a product owner, product manager, like a CEO or a customer or whatever. The first thing is always the thing that is going to be the most important when it comes to any type of project and stakeholder, when it comes to any type of deadline, and that is to set the correct expectations. I've said this in a few videos before. Setting the correct expectations is key because you work in a profession that puts you in the expert position, and you work with people most often who are less experienced, they have less knowledge than you have. And that is a very similar position to a personal trainer or a scientist or whatever. You see, the people around you are not as knowledgeable about how things actually work as you are, which means that the biggest favor you can make to yourself or give yourself and do to you, like for the stakeholder, is to actually make them understand as well as possible, and understanding them in turn, of course, the situation. Like you basically understanding setting the expectations correctly, because if there's a mismatch, it's going to end really, really poorly. And that comes down to personal security. I have seen very, very many, quite a lot of developers, especially the more junior ones, because you have this need in the beginning to accommodate people regardless of what the request is, because in the beginning, before you become more secure in yourself, you're going to feel this need to make promises that make people happy. And that's where I'm going to try to tell you that that's actually making yourself, that's a mistake. It's a big mistake in the beginning of things, because when you're doing time estimation and people are asking you that all powerful, amazing question, how long are you going to need? You need to be honest. And it's very tough in the beginning, but you need to be honest. And the reason why you need to be honest is because if you try to make people happy, you try to give half-truths or lie or something like that, what you're going to do is that you're going to set the expectations incorrectly. And you've also completely killed off any chance to act on potential risk to the project, which means that if you give a false estimation and you start working and things actually take longer, you're going to miss the deadline. And that's a big problem. Sometimes you can't do this better than what you're doing, because estimation is a flawed game. It's something that is very hard, but it's very important that you're not systematically crippling your ability to deliver on a deadline just because you want to make somebody happy or impress somebody with a magic number that feels good to you. Because I can tell you right now that unless there's a significant difference, if you need 2 days or you need 5 days, it doesn't always matter all that much. But to some developers, it's a world of difference, because if your coworker can do it in 2 days, then you shouldn't need 4 days or 3 days. Like, it becomes a competition. And it's a danger. That's a very slippery slope. So first and foremost, personal security, so that you have the ability to set expectations correctly. You need to feel comfortable with just telling people the truth about a situation, regardless of what that is. That's number one. Second part is empathy, to have the ability to understand a situation and people primarily, because basically what it's going to come down to here is that when you deal with a deadline or a product manager or a product owner of any kind, you're going to have different kinds of stakeholders, or a product, you will have different product owners, and your ability to understand their process, or if it's a customer or whatever, is the thing that is going to dictate how well you will align with the expectations that you have now set with them. In other words, you're like being able to communicate effectively with people and asking the right questions before you start working, because the earlier you can ask the right questions and really make sure that you understand the other person, because it's not just about reading a piece of paper that states this is what we're going to build. Unless, of course, you have a waterfall way of working and this is exactly the thing that you're going to build. That's going to cause other problems if you go with a literal thing that is stated on paper. It's much more efficient for you to have the emotional intelligence and the social skills to actually figure out and to really ask really good questions up front and do like a proper investigation before you start working. Because if you do, it will become much easier for you to spot potential risks or things that may make you miss a deadline or things of this nature up front. And then you need to continue that process as you work. In other words, you build something, like you try to work as much as possible in an iterative fashion. Build the first thing, the first part of whatever product you're working on. Don't build the whole thing. Don't sit there for the whole duration and just build something and then show things at the end. Show things in segments, like build something small, MVP as we call it, show that to the consumer, the product owner or whatever, and ask for their input. And that this comes down again to the EQ, like how often you should do this. You're going to get a feel for that as you kind of work, and the more you understand the person that you are working for. Because the worst thing is if you build something incorrectly and show it at the end, and then it's too late to act on it. But if you build something small, like you take the first step on delivering your project, and then you show that, you can get feedback. And quick, like continuous feedback as you work is the thing that is going to dictate how close you hit the mark when it comes to delivering on time and delivering the right thing. So make sure that you have this process right. And third and lastly, I'm going to say that it basically comes down to understanding business, understanding people's processes and how they work and so forth. And that is actually one of the most important things that you can have as a software developer, because the likelihood of you writing the correct code and basically creating a situation where you can sustain the project for long periods of time comes down to how well you understand not just people, but also the way that the business work and how they work and their processes. Because if you have people who basically work in a fashion where, all right, they ship a feature after a deal with some customer, and then they ship in the next, like the week out, and the next week they have a new customer and a new deadline and new things, and they never, like, if you have like continuously new projects and these are fairly ad hoc projects, then you have then you can kind of figure out from that you don't have the time to go back and fix things later, which means that you need to really make sure that you get it right on the first time. If you have the same thing, that the same thing is continually changing over and over and over, then you know that you can't really make any assumptions about this until things stabilize a little bit. Like these small subtle things, like just understanding how the business or the company that you are working for, how they're making their money and how they actually how they get these revenue streams, is going to dictate a lot. Because when you understand that, then you know which architecture to go with. You know which decision is going to end up being a legacy and what decision is going to end up being probably the best solution for this specific company. Don't listen. So in this scenario, it's a good idea to know all the best practices and then pick the one that is correct. Just blindly following somebody else's architecture is a fairly bad idea. And long term, you should be able to pick the correct one for the situation. But that comes down to primarily understanding how the business works. Because I can tell you right now, if you think microservices is the way to solve every problem, then you don't know architecture and you don't understand business needs. Because there are way-offs with things like that, just as there are way-offs with monoliths, or if you're going to use which language you're going to use, which stack, and all of these sorts of things. These are things that come with experience, guys. But the thing that will dictate most of the decisions that you make when you actually know all of these tools is how the business work. So what I want you to take away from this is that number one, when it comes to dealing with deadlines and people and like stakeholders, the first and foremost thing is set the expectations correctly so that you know that you have a feasible deadline and people who have a clear picture of what is actually going to be delivered. Second thing is make sure that you have enough empathy or enough people skills to actually ask the correct questions before you start working, and make sure that you are continuously looping in the people who are your stakeholders as you work, because that increases your likelihood on delivering on time, being able to act on issues or problems that arise, and delivering the correct thing at the correct time. And lastly, make sure that you actually understand how the business work and how the stakeholders that you have, how their processes actually work, because that is the thing that's going to dictate what tools you pick and what architecture you pick, because your system needs to be a good reflection of the needs of that specific stakeholder. Because unless you understand that, you might end up in a situation where you build the correct thing according to some public speaker somewhere, but it's a really bad solution for that specific company, and then it's not worth anything to that company, or rather it's just going to be a hindrance when it could have been something that actually was useful. Have a great day.